Can learning Hebrew words help Christians strengthen their faith? Well, many people are discovering that learning a little bit of Hebrew goes a long way toward a deeper faith and a better understanding of the Bible. Well, my guest today, Aussie Dave Adamson, is a pastor dedicated to helping Christians understand the Bible through Hebrew insights. And Aussie Dave has a brand new book called 52 Hebrew Names of God that every Christian should know. Well, today in the Game Changers Forum, we'll discuss Hebrew words, names, and insights, and how this Jewish stuff can help Christians everywhere. Aussie Dave, it's great to see you today, mate. How are you?
I'm so glad I get to spend time with you this morning. This morning, my time. I don't even know what time it is for you, but
it's evening.
It's so good to see you this evening / this morning.
It is. I'm in Atlanta. You're in Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah.
And yes, so we are on the other sides of the world. But man, it is so good to connect with you. And I'm super excited about your new book. We're going to talk about that
thanks, dude.
And a whole lot more. But hey, before we even jump into our discussion, folks are going to pick up on the fact that we've been friends for a while. But I want to just tell folks a little bit about you. So Aussie Dave is actually the Australia director for YouVersion. We're going to talk about what he does with YouVersion and more about YouVersion a little bit because it ties in with our theme for today. But Aussie Dave has been just sharing practical Hebrew insights from Hebrew words and we'll just say Jewish stuff through Instagram, social media, and pretty much everything he touches for many, many years. So his new books are very connected to that. And so his big thing is, hey, he wants to illuminate the Bible for Christians. And we're going to talk about how all those things, the Hebrew words, the Jewish stuff, ties into knowing your faith better. But again, Dave, speaking of the Bible, I'm super excited about your new book. Congratulations on getting it out.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, it's a you know this. You've done this yourself. It's a long process of writing and editing and going through what you want to share with people.
Right.
What do you think would be the most helpful? So to have it come out. Again, it's every time it's like birthing a child, I think.
It's a good analogy.
It's just great to have it out in the world, especially, from a faith point of view, from a religious point of view, we know we need to be humble, but at the same time, we feel like we've been learning things. We feel like we've been growing in things that would help other people. And so you're walking that. I always personally, I don't know how you feel, Ryan, but I also always feel like I'm walking the tightrope of I've got something that I think might help, but I also want to be humble and sit back, and I don't want to be really promotional at all.
Yeah.
So I just like when I just get to talk with people about, anything to do with Jewish culture, anything to do with Hebraic culture, anything to do with especially how that has changed my faith personally.
Yeah. And we're gonna jump into all that because your story is really important and how it, what you're sharing with others started with you. So anyway, we're going to get into all that. But all right, so we got to give a little history here. I've known you. I was trying to do the timeline. I think I met you 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It was about 2015. And actually, do you remember who introduced us?
Clay Scroggins.
Clay. Yeah, Clay Scroggins.
So he was Clay, the pastor at North Point at the time.
That's right. And I met Clay and he was like, he knew my background and the Jewish stuff and being Jewish, all that. And he was like, oh, you got to meet Aussie Dave. And of course, as soon as we met, we were fast mates.
Yes.
And so that, as they say, the rest is history. But, I'm just going to say like your Hebrew journey and interest in Jewish stuff as a Christian.
Yeah.
This was going on long before we met. So why don't we jump in with you telling a little bit of your story about how a pastor from Australia developed a passion for Hebrew and the Jewish foundations of Christianity.
Yeah, look, I think I'd have to go way back and just really thumbnail it real quick, but I didn't grow up in a Christian home at all. And so I started following Jesus when I was probably 17, like year 11-ish, in high school. And because I didn't have a Christian family at all, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I made this decision because somebody had taught me about Jesus over the course of several months, and I made this decision to start following Jesus, and I just went to the nearest church. I literally got up the next morning, Sunday morning, and walked to the nearest church. I didn't know anything about church,
Crazy.
didn't know anything about denominations, didn't know anything, and
this was in Melbourne.
This is in Melbourne, in the western suburbs of Melbourne, and I did not want to become a pastor. I did not want to go into ministry. It wasn't even on my radar. And so, I just started taking the first steps in my faith and went to college and got a journalism degree, became a journalist here in Melbourne, and ended up being on a TV reporter here in Australia as a sports reporter for one of our shows that is kind of similar to ESPN Sports Center. And again, still had no interest in going into full-time ministry at all. This was
I got a quick question. Wait,
yeah.
Did you cover Aussie rules football? Did you do that?
Dude,
that's the craziest.
Aussie rules football is the greatest sport on the planet. And it is the thing that I miss most while I lived. So I lived in the US for 14 years. It was the thing that I missed most. And now that I'm back and being in Melbourne, which is where it started, this is the heart of it. Oh my gosh. Yes, I covered it.
It's amazing.
I covered the Grand Prix. I covered the Australian Open tennis, 7 or 8 years in a row. So I had the dream job, but then God called me into ministry, and called me to all places, called me into full-time ministry to become a pastor in New Jersey. And so there's a church in New Jersey that, I got connected with, and they invited me to come out, and this was 2008. I became an online pastor. I was, according to all the information we can find, I was the 8th online pastor in the world. Wow. And I was just learning about, I literally was learning about full-time ministry, while also still, if I'm really candid, still learning about what it meant to follow Jesus. Yeah. And so, I had a whole bunch of pastor friends around me that, I would ask them questions and we would talk, and we would, I was learning on the job, so to speak. The great thing about God, right? God knew that what he was getting me into well in advance. So all the skills that I brought with me from a journalist point of view were so helpful in what I was doing. But at the same time, there was an internal, I just want to know more, and I want to learn more, and I want to understand more. And so I'm living in a town called Madison, New Jersey. And a pastor on staff started talking to me about, he said something about the Shema prayer. He started teaching me about the Shema. I'd never heard that term before. I never knew what it was before. But when he taught it to me and taught me the history of it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is fascinating. And how come I've never been taught this before in church, in Christian church? Why was I never taught this? But that started a process of me having a lot of questions. And because I had a lot of questions around the Shema, because I had a lot of questions around Jewish culture and what else I was missing about the potential culture of Jesus, I wanted to find out. So I literally walked around the corner I looked up online, and there was a synagogue around the corner from where I lived. And I just walked there one day, knocked on the door, and this guy, Rabbi Lubin, opened the door, welcomed me in, made me the hottest coffee I've ever had in my life. I think the roof of my mouth is still burnt from it. But he sat across, the way from me, and we sat in just facing each other and drank coffee. And he just said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I've got lots of questions about Jesus." And he looked at me kind of weird. And why did you come here then? I said, "Well, because Jesus was Jewish and you're Jewish, and you know a lot about the culture, and I just want to learn. I just want to grow. I just want to understand a little bit more about that culture that Jesus grew up in." And Ryan, he was so gracious with his time, with his, and so for the next couple of years, I would go and visit him, a couple times a month, and we would just sit and talk. And I had question after question, and the things that he taught me about following Jesus, what it meant to be a Talmid, a disciple of Jesus, I had never heard before. And it helped me take so many steps forward in my faith. And I would honestly say Rabbi Lubin, probably one of the biggest influences on my Christian faith of anybody that I know. Like, it was just unbelievable. And so, I sat through his Torah classes with him from time to time. We did a whole bunch of stuff together. And I just love the guy because he just grew my understanding of the culture that Jesus grew up in. And from there, it just springboarded. The more I learned, the more I realized the more I learned what I didn't know. And the more I knew what I didn't know, the more I wanted to know. But also I wanted to stay in that learning process. And so when I moved to Atlanta in 2013, I got several opportunities to go over to Israel and lead some tours in Israel. And I got to know some other rabbis over in Israel and some other Messianic rabbis in America, including yourself. And yeah, I mean, from the first day that I met you, one of my first questions was probably, hey, what's your favorite Hebrew word? Because I just love learning this process and culture. And so sitting through, I got friends in Jerusalem and the very first time I had Shabbat dinner with their family, I mean, it was so rich. It was so I was just in awe. And so literally all I do, Ryan, is in the books that I write, and the stuff that I post on social media, I'm just trying to teach people the stuff that I'm learning. It's not new. I don't think I have this new revelation. I don't think that I'm teaching them anything. The funny thing is, the stuff that I teach, the stuff that I share, is stuff that for you is just second nature. But I know so many Christians just don't. They don't get it because we look at Jesus through Western eyes. And we paint a westernized version of Jesus, and understanding Jesus in the Middle Eastern cultural context, that has transformed my faith. It's changed everything, and it's changed how I raise my kids. It's changed how I'm a husband. It definitely changed how I'm a dad and a pastor for sure. That's why it's so significant and important to me. All goes back to an Orthodox Jewish rabbi in New Jersey, of all places.
That's wild. I want to ask you a little bit more about that relationship, because I think it's so it's beautiful. And I know it's a huge part of your story. And I remember when you and I met for the first time, I was really moved by just your approach, just the way you described it here is the way I remember you describing it 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And what stood out to me, Dave, is that you approached that relationship from a learning standpoint. You wanted to learn. You went in with humility and was like, hey, I've got a lot to learn. You weren't trying to change him. Rather, you saw that you could learn about your own faith through Rabbi Lubin. But I would say that this whole thing that we're talking about here, this relationship with not just with Rabbi Lubin, but just with, Judaism and Jewish sources, Jewish stuff, Hebrew, all this, it's out of the box, I think, for a lot of Christians. And so, I think a lot of Christians might look at that as weird or unusual for somebody like you to want to learn with a rabbi. So I want to just press into that a little bit. Talk to us a little bit more, maybe some specifics or an example or two of how did what Rabbi Lubin, how did it enhance your faith? What did he share with you that maybe even made you challenged you to think outside the box?
Yeah. Such a great question. He totally challenged me to think completely outside of the box, more than anybody to that point probably had, to be really honest. I think I went into it, look, I've already shared my background, my career background is as a journalist. And so as a journalist, you're taught to think critically. And I know in Christian circles in the church, being critical is not necessarily advantageous to you. People don't want you to question things to a certain extent, but I've always had that questioning mindset. I think it's just something that I grew up with. I used to say, I guess I'm just skeptical. And my wife, in her wisdom, she said, you've got to change that. Being skeptical is a negative. I think you are curious, and that's a positive. And so
that's a great pivot. That's a great pivot. Yeah.
That's my wife for you. So now I say, no, I'm just curious. I'm curious about people. I'm curious about faith. I'm curious about the scriptures. I'm curious about church. I'm curious about a whole bunch of things. And so I went into my relationship with, I showed up at the synagogue because I was curious. I had questions. One of my favorite theologians is Abraham Joshua Heschel. And his quote, you are closer to God when you have questions than when you think you have all the answers. That quote has stuck with me and drives almost everything that I do. And so I went into that first meeting with Rabbi Lubin, just with questions. I had questions. And I remember the way that Rabbi Lubin challenged me, one of the biggest, Ryan, I don't know if I've shared this with you, but one of the biggest ways he challenged me, he was teaching me about what it meant to be a Talmud, especially in first century Jewish culture, right? What a disciple.
Dave, make sure, disciple. There you go. Talmud just means disciple or learner. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I say Talmud, disciple means apprentice. Because as an apprentice, and this is what he taught me, as an apprentice, I'm trying to be what the person who's teaching. If I'm an apprentice mechanic, I'm trying to learn the skills of the mechanic so I can do what the mechanic does. But I think in Western Christianity, a lot of times we call disciple a student. And as a student in Western schools, we know if I can repeat what the teacher says, I get an A on my essay. But an apprentice is different. Apprentice is about doing. If I'm an apprentice plumber, I'm learning to do the thing. And so, he taught me that a Talmud, a disciple, is more like an apprentice. And I remember one day he said to me, so are you a follower of Jesus? Are you a disciple? Are you a Talmud of Jesus? And I said, yeah, I like to think so. And he stopped and he said, and he stroked he's got the big black beard and he stroked his beard and he said, when was the last time you read the book of Matthew? And I went, well, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago, I was reading out of it. No, and he said, no, from start to finish. When was the last time you did that? I went, oh, God, I don't know, like a couple of years ago, maybe. When was the last time you read Mark? Again, a couple of years. And then he said, when was the last time you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in a row, just in a short period of time? I said, I honestly have never done that. I've never read the Gospels back to back like that. I read them like a recipe book. What I need or what I'm studying or whatever. And he said to me, a Talmud was with their rabbi 24/7, all the time, learning everything. They wanted to know when the rabbi was angry, how did they respond? When the rabbi was sad, what did they say? When the rabbi was ready to eat, what did they, or go to sleep or wake up, what was the prayer? What was the blessing they were saying? And he looked me in the eye and he said, you can't call yourself a disciple of Jesus if you don't read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John every month. Week 1, Matthew, week 2. And I was like,
wow, that's pretty strong, man.
How am I learning this from a rabbi teaching me to read the Gospels? Like it was, but that challenged me to go.
You did not. I haven't heard that before. That's pretty
right.
Wild. Yeah.
That was that challenge that he hit me with that I wasn't defensive about. Right. I wasn't defensive about that. I just went, oh my gosh, I've never thought of that. But if I want to be like Jesus, I need to spend time with Jesus. And how do I spend time with Jesus? Well, the Gospels do that. I mean, that's not to say the rest of the New Testament, the rest of the Hebrew Bible is not important. Obviously, it is.
Sure.
But to find out the life and times of Jesus from the eyewitnesses, that's how I get to spend time with my rabbi. And that challenged me so much that, again, another huge component in my life that just kickstarted a whole new era of spiritual growth and just figuring out what Jesus was like and what that meant to me practically and how I started to live that out.
That's a very vivid example, and thanks for sharing that because I didn't realize that that's quite a challenge. But I think that is an area where that word Talmud, disciple, is something that in Judaism it really does. It's much more than just learning information. Yeah. It's like patterning. It's doing everything like your rabbi does, and so that's really cool that he pulled that out for you and gave you that challenge.
Yeah, and even just the fact that he would do that to me, to challenge me to read the Gospels. Yeah, that just underlined that. I'm so glad that he's approaching it the same way. He's approaching it from a curiosity point of view, and he wasn't holding on to the guardrails, the boundaries that he had. He was like, you're a different person on a different faith journey, and you're a man. He said to me one time, you're a person who's a man who's following after God, and I want to help you follow after God, whatever that looks like for you, because you've got a different ladder to climb than I do as a Jewish man. But I want to encourage you in the ladder that you're climbing. And I just found that so profoundly humble and inclusionary. Yeah, it was amazing. You can imagine, it just made me want to spend even more time with him to learn even more. Like it was that posture.
Yeah, that's really remarkable. I didn't realize that was part of the story, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that
Yeah,
that that says a lot. So Rabbi Lubin was huge, and I know
yeah,
you're still close to him,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're still
Every time I'm
connected
in
to
New
him.
Jersey, I go and visit him.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome. So, and I know you've referenced him in your books, but that was real. That as you framed it, that was just the beginning. I
yeah,
mean, that just was getting things moving.
yeah,
So, talk to us about how like things have advanced from there. About how you've you know interacted. That was the beginnings, the first stop, but you've continued to interact with Jewish sources,
yeah,
Hebrew sources
yeah.
that have really talked to us about how this journey has continued to help you to learn and think differently about Jesus and the Bible as you've gone further down the road past Rabbi Lubin.
Yeah, so it's kind of a bit weird, right? If it was taken out of context, but every time we move to a new place, like not that that happens very often, but like when we moved to Atlanta, Clay introduced me to you because I was like, hey, who are the messianic rabbis in the area? Because like I
Yeah,
want to spend time with them because I learned so much about the traditions and the culture and all these little tiny bits of information that I keep putting into my tool belt as things that are that have been transformative to me. So even when we moved back to Australia in 2021, we live on in a place called the Sunshine Coast.
right.
And there's one rabbi in the whole region. Like it's I don't know, 600-kilometer region or something. There's one rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, Rabbi Oshi. I have coffee
Hmm.
with Rabbi Oshi.
Nice.
Why? Because dude, teach me stuff. And like
Yeah.
he was teaching me about first century. Last time I had coffee with him, we unpacked first century sacrificial traditions and the rituals of like it was. And I'm just, again, this is real nerd stuff now. But for me, it's just building on stuff that so many other people have poured into me. I got my
Sure.
hands on any books I could find about the Jewishness of Jesus, everything from extremely academic books that were kind of hard to read right down to some massively influential books in my life, like by Lois Tieberberg and Anne Spangler.
Yeah.
And I remember you've given me. I've still got all the books that you've given me. Like I still read them like over and over
Yeah.
again because they just have transformed the way that I pray. They've transformed the way that I live out my life. They've transformed the way that I follow after Jesus, wanting to get covered in his dust. And then being able to go to Israel multiple times, lead some tours over there, take my daughter over there, take my wife
Mm.
over there, and to stand in the middle of the Judean wilderness and just
Yeah.
look around and go, okay, lots of things have changed, but this hasn't changed too much. Not
Yeah.
too much,
Yeah.
but to experience that. And my wife would always be like, why do you want to go there during summer? Because I want it to be as hot as it could possibly be. And I want to hike down the Wadi Kelt in the hottest
Mm.
day of the year because I want to feel what it was like to live in that culture, to smell and to taste and to touch. And yeah, it's that creative in me comes out because it's not just stuff I'm reading. It's not just information I'm putting into my head. I'm smelling it. I'm tasting it. I'm feeling it with my feet and with my hands and getting to have conversations with people. Like that's just where I learned so much. And so I guess it's almost like osmosis, right? I'm learning by experiencing
Yeah.
and touching and smelling the things. And that has just brought me to a much deeper sense of anything to do with what I read in scripture. To be able to like I've got a Bible that I take, and this is I probably shouldn't even say this on recording that I do this. Every time I go,
No, come on, say it. It's going to be good.
there's a little Bible that I take with me. And when I'm at the Sea of Galilee, I open to where Jesus is walking on water and I splash water from the Sea of Galilee onto those pages. When I'm at the Jordan River, um, I open to where Jesus gets baptized and I put water. When
Mm.
Jesus goes into the wilderness, that those pages have dust from the Judean wilderness, like I've smeared it onto the page. When Jesus in Gethsemane, I've literally got an olive leaf from Gethsemane inside those pages, and I try to smush in because I want it to mark, I want it to
Yeah.
mark the pages because then the whole thing just comes so alive for me. Um,
Isn't it? Isn't it? We are so blessed to have the opportunity to be able to go to
yeah,
Israel and to
yeah,
to to walk, where Abraham walked, to walk
Yeah.
where Jacob walked, to walk where King David, Jesus, Paul. I mean, it's such a privilege. And I know that probably, well, I know plenty of our listeners, some have been to Israel, some
Yeah.
have not, but it's just truly an amazing experience for all the reasons that you've said and more. But that's a cool thing, man. So in other
Yeah.
words, you go back later on when you're not there and you can still see the water from,
Yes, I can still feel the sand.
you
I
can
want to know,
feel it.
Brian, can I ask you a question? When you're in Israel, what's your favorite place? What's the place that for you, from a spiritual point of view, you just go, oh my gosh, like I feel like God is here, or that something comes alive in you? What is that place for you?
There's no question. I have a very, very decisive response to that. First of all, though, I want you. Can you guess? I'm going to give you one guess as to what you think it might be, and then I'm just going to tell you. So we're going to play a little game here.
Okay.
What would be? It's like it's a slam dunk. It's always been this way from trip one. Been there 20 times.
Okay.
And it's been true since trip one. The spot that answers your question.
So the Christian in me says that it would be like the Sea of Galilee. The me in me says I want it to be the Judean wilderness, like the Wadi Kalt or En Gedi. Like that's what I want it to be.
I like those spots,
but I'm trying to think through it from your cultural context as well, and I'm thinking it might be the Jewish cemetery that is on the Mount of Olives.
You're close. You're very, very close. So yeah, on the Mount of Olives, it's the Western Wall. When I'm at the Kotel, okay, the Kotel, which is the Hebrew term for the Western Wall. Some people know refer to it as the Wailing Wall, but it's the Western Wall. Dave, it is absolutely. I feel like whenever I'm in Israel, it's like almost like there's this magnetic pull for me to get to the Western Wall and spend as much time there as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is just because obviously that is the Western retaining wall of the Temple Mount. And that's where the first temple and the second temple, stood. And there's just so much biblical significance when it comes to the presence of God that centers around that geographical space. I just feel God's presence there, and it is just it's very, very moving to me. But in particular, I like to go there at night. Once the sun set, it gets a little bit cooler. It's not as busy. It can be busy there at night, as you know, but I love being at the Western Wall at night and just really just meditating and praying, and I truly feel God's presence there. So that's a great question, but it is definitely that spot.
That's awesome. One of my favorite experiences of all time in Israel happened at the Western Wall. I was there on a trip. This was a trip my daughter was on with me, but obviously she wasn't allowed to go to the section that I was in. Right. And I was there at the time when they pulled the scrolls out and they put them down on the table and started reading them. And I was just watching as 12 rabbis all stood around and they had this young boy sing the scriptures. And then they just started arguing with each other. And I was like, this is like, it's heated. Like there's going to be punches thrown. Like this is, and they're all obviously speaking Hebrew. My Hebrew was nowhere near good enough to keep up with anything that they were saying. Yeah. But at the end of it, they wrote, the boy came up again. He sung the scriptures again, and then they rolled up the scroll. And then all of these guys who had just been like almost at each other's throats all hugged each other and walked off singing together like they just left a bar. Yeah, that's it. And their footy team had won. And I was like, what have I just experienced? And a rabbi friend of mine said to me, what you just watched was Makloket L'Shem Shemayim. They were arguing for the sake of heaven. And I went, wait. What? And he said there are two sorts of arguments, arguing for the sake of power and arguing for the sake of heaven. They walked off friends because they were sharpening each other. Yeah. And when when iron sharpens iron, sparks fly. But then they're so thankful for it because they get closer to heaven through that. And I was like, man, imagine what would happen in the world if more Christians argued for the sake of heaven instead of arguing for the sake of power. That alone for me was a huge kick in the guts, but in the best possible way.
I love it, man. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. And that just hits the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's good stuff. We could, of course, stay on the Israel topic the
Yes.
whole time here, but I want to pivot a little bit into into just some of the things that you're doing, and then we got to get into your books too. So,
Yep.
obviously not every Christian's going to be able to have the opportunity to have a relationship with a Rabbi Lubin.
Yeah.
And obviously and a lot of Christians aren't even going to have the opportunity to go to the land of Israel or dig into, some of the Jewish sources that you've had the opportunity to dig into. And so, that's fair. But I would say that these days, I would say pretty much every Christian has the opportunity to learn about the Jewish context of the Bible and to tap into what you're talking about here. Now, all somebody has to do is look at your Instagram history, your Instagram page, which I highly recommend, Aussie Davie. And they will see that you've been passionate about this Jewish stuff for a long time, but this is not just for you. And that's where I want to pivot a little bit, is that clearly the Jewish stuff is something that you think a lot of Christians can benefit from. So talk about this. How do you feel like, somebody who maybe is not going to be as into it and as passionate about it as you, but how can Christians maybe still benefit from beginning to learn a little bit more and more about these kinds of topics?
Yeah. It's a good question. See, I don't think that I'm by any stretch of the imagination a deep theological scholar or a Hebrew scholar or anything along those lines. The stuff that I write on my social media, the stuff that I write in my books is not meant to be an exhaustive academic level breakdown of Hebrew. I'm literally just taking the stuff that has meant something to me and helped me take the next step in my faith journey. And putting it into a form that I hope is accessible to everybody who is short on time and everybody who wants to be serious about following Jesus, but maybe doesn't have the capacity or to go to Israel, right? Or has the opportunities to even do, tertiary level academic study or anything like that. So I try to just break it down into really practical ways. And part of the way that I do that is just through a word, like doing one word study, because I've seen the way that has impacted me. As I said, for me, it started with learning the Shema prayer, learning for even not just the prayer, just learning that the word Shema means to hear and to obey. I was just like, wait, why don't I know that? Now, as a parent, I know this, right? As a parent, I know, because every parent knows when you ask your kid to clean their room and then you come back 20 minutes later and you say, did you clean your room? Did you hear what I said? You're not asking if they listened. You're asking if they obeyed or why they didn't obey. So we know that intuitively. But to then look at scripture and in Deuteronomy, hear, O Israel, it's not just listen, it's obey. For me, it ties into the Talmud apprentice thing, right? It's one thing for me just to learn with my head, but it's another thing for me to pray with my feet and not just recite words, but actually go and do stuff. So it's little things like that I go, man, that's just one word that I have overlooked for years and years and not even realized. But then I learned that one word. And it changes everything for me. And then I learned, a word that everybody, every Christian probably knows, shalom, the word for peace. But the fact that doesn't just mean the absence of conflict, but it also means wholeness, completeness. And you think of Jesus being the Prince of Peace and the way that he makes our relationship with God whole. Oh my gosh, like that's, again, hearing that for the very first time, I was blown away. And so I want other people to experience that. I especially want my girls to experience that. I've got 3 daughters.
Sure.
I want them to experience that same awe that I had when I first learned these things. And so a lot of what I do, and I think I might have already told you this, Ryan, a lot of what I do on social media, on my Instagram, I just tell my girls, this is for you. I'm teaching you. When I die, you'll know everything that your dad knew about Jesus from my Instagram account. That's why I do it. And it just happens to have helped a lot of other people as well. But I do it for my kids.
No, that's beautiful, and that's it's very authentic, and I love following your Instagram again because you give it to people in bite sizes,
Yeah.
like just a little bit at a time, which is
Yeah.
all we're saying here. But that accumulates over time, and it's like, wow, I've been following Aussie Dave or Loet Sverberg or whoever it
Yeah.
might be, and it's like you're just going to learn a little bit, and you're like, hey, I'm starting to get the
Yeah.
hang of this a little bit. I think what you brought up too, Dave, about the Shema is so important because one, just learning what that word means. I mean, you unpacked it a minute ago, so I won't be redundant, but that's really important because even in I think it's Matthew 22, Jesus is asked the question, teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he starts, he utters the Shema, you
Yeah.
shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, the Shema, the V'ahavta.
Yeah.
And so that even learning what that Hebrew word means can kind of bring some definition
Yeah.
to even Jesus's answer to that question.
Yeah. And then Jesus says, he who
Yeah.
has ears, let them hear. And I remember reading that going,
Yeah, it's cool.
of course, if I've got ears, I hear. What are you talking about? But when you look at it from the word Shema, he who has ears, let them obey. If you heard what I said, then do what I said. That's how I interpret that now. Again, just that one, he who has ears, let them hear. Knowing what hear means changed everything for me. Well, okay, I can't just read it. I've got to do it. I've got to put this into action. If I'm not putting this into action, I'm somebody who has ears but doesn't hear. Got it.
Yeah.
Never heard that before. And it just was, it all just interconnects and interweaves. And you can see, for me, it's something I'm so passionate about because it has transformed how I live out my faith. It's not just stuff that I have in my head. It's how I live out my faith day to day.
You said it's, and again, I know you you said, hey, you can get nerdy, and like we can get real nerdy about all this stuff. But again, you're saying, hey, this isn't just, I love that. And this is so important. This isn't just head knowledge. It's not just academic stuff. This can be very, very practical.
Yeah.
And speaking of practical, I want to start talking about your books a little bit, especially the new one, but I want to talk about both of them. But even before we talk about the books, I want to just make sure that folks, just from the standpoint of maybe some people could be like, okay, this one is 52 Hebrew words. This is another 52 Hebrew words, the new book. So you're not saying, though, that somebody's got to learn Hebrew, right? You're not saying that at all, but you're just saying Hebrew concepts, and a little bit goes a long way, right? As far as learning some of these basics. So just kind of talk about that a little bit. What you're not saying.
Yeah, I'm not saying you have to be fluent in Hebrew in order to get to follow Jesus on a new level. No, I'm not saying that at all. And in fact, I mean, when you think about it, I'm not even saying you have to learn a new Hebrew word every single day of the year. It's not 365 Hebrew words every Christian should know. The reason it's 52 is because I wanted it to be a weekly thing. I wanted it to be a weekly rhythm of learning and meditating and trying to enact one word, one new concept every single week. If we could just do that. Yeah. And so it's not about overwhelming. It is taking those bite-sized things and trying to get into that. It's almost like, the idea of rest and Sabbath and routine are some of the things that I've learned from my Jewish friends that I wanted to bring into this book. And so it wasn't about, here's an academic outline of what every letter and every word. No, I don't want to do it every day. I just want to make it practical and I want to make it easy. Well, let me rephrase that. I want to make it practical and I want it to be uncomplicated. That does not mean it's easy.
Yeah, that's good.
Learning what Shema means and that it means hear and obey, that's simple, but it's not easy to live out. So I wanted to give people space to live that out. One word a week. Like, what does that look like and feel like? And how does that, people ask me all the time about complex theological questions and they'll say, well, why don't you take a stand on this? And my response is now always, well, Jesus told me to, what you just said before, Jesus told me to love God and love my neighbor. And I'm just trying to figure that out. And that's going to take me the rest of my life. And once I figured that out, then I'll go to the complex issues, the divisive issues, right?
That keeps us busy enough.
Yeah, it's so simple. This is the brilliance of Jesus. So simple to understand. but that does not mean it's easy. And so that's why I wanted it to be once a week things, just bite-sized
Yeah.
little pieces that you can interact with and make congruent with your life.
And you've done that brilliantly as far as just the way you've crafted this. But I want to, before we get into the new book, which we're going to get to, let's talk about this first Hebrew words book that you wrote. So this one that I'm holding is 52 Hebrew words every Christian should know. Yeah. So this is, and people can get this on Amazon. I love it. It's this like kind of this leather, and I love how you did the pages here. They're very easy. They're entries, and it really is just, again, not easy, but it's very clear. So talk to us about this first book that you wrote. What inspired you to write this, and kind of how did it come together, and choosing which 52 words?
Yeah, choosing which 52 words, it was really hard. And one of the things I say in the introduction to that book is this is not meant to be an academic, exhaustive list of the only, words that Christians should learn that Hebrew. These are just the things that the words that I had the most impact on me, and that were built around a concept. Like one of the words in there is Shema. Why? Because it's such an important word that started the whole thing for me off. But then that led to some other things and some other ideas, and even just the idea of Shabbat, and the idea of tzedakah and righteousness, and what that means and how that started to change the way that I played out. So really, it's 52 Hebrew words that changed my faith. It's a marketing ploy to say that every Christian should know, but I want my girls to know these words. I want my girls to be able to follow this book and live by the concepts that are in it, because I wanted it to be as practical as possible. So these are the words that were practical and applicable.
Right. I mean, you even got a word. I'm just on page 33, tal, about do. And you talk about the significance of that word. And kind of how it relates to our faith. And so this is really great. Okay. So that's highly recommend this one. This is a good place to start, but let's talk about, your new book as well. And this one is still warm. It's still hot off the press. Just got to me. And I know it's really doing well. And so this one, is called 52 Names of God in Hebrew that every Christian should know. Yeah. And so I think it's interesting to me, obviously you started general with this one, 52 Hebrew words, but then you dialed in, this is not just 52 more Hebrew words. These are specifically 52 Hebrew names of God. Now I think maybe a lot of people might be surprised to know that there are actually more than 52 Hebrew names of God in the Bible. Yeah. So I think that's actually a pretty cool thing to learn in and of itself. But what inspired you to kind of go in this direction and kind of this collection of Hebrew words? Talk to us about this.
Look, one of the things I started to realize the more I got into the Hebraic culture, the more I got into, reading the Hebrew Bible through a different sort of lens. One of the things I started to recognize was the amount of times the characters of the Bible refer to God in names other than God, which is what God or Father is typically how I was taught to refer to God. Sure. But they had specific names for him. And what I started to realize was a lot of those names were actually tied to promises. And if you know God's name, you know God's heart. And sometimes knowing God's name in a situation changes that situation, because every name tells a story, and every story reveals more and more about the heart of God. And so, what I wanted to do specifically, again, selfishly, I wanted my girls to know a whole bunch of different names for God, because if they know God's name, they'll know God's heart. And if you know God's heart, then you're able to find God's purpose in every situation. And so for me, that was a huge part of it. We know, a lot of Christians know of God as God the healer and the Lord of peace and things like that help us when we're in times of crisis, when we're in times of sickness, when we're in times of chaos. But there are so many other just regular, ordinary names of God. There are so many other names of God that can impact every single every single situation that we ever face in life. And so that for me was the impetus behind it, was understanding that God has multiple names because God has multiple promises that are attached to many of the names that the characters of the Bible refer to him.
Would you say also that some of the names of God, they highlight attributes of God
100%.
and aspects of God, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's a part of it too. So it's the promises, it's the aspects. It's like you're really, as you learn these different names, especially the way you've done it,
Yeah.
with the emphasis on the actual Hebrew word. And it's
Yeah.
like, what's great about it is that you can like see, you give the Hebrew, you give the meaning, how to,
Yeah.
you give the transliteration so that people can actually pronounce it.
Yeah.
So you provide all that, but I think that you really draw out, okay, how does this name
Yeah.
actually help us to know something more about God from a
Yeah.
biblical perspective? So
Yeah,
that's
and
pretty
then
cool.
and then the other aspect to that is then hopefully that will help you tell, it'll help you do, right? So
Yeah,
I always want to make it as practical as I possibly can. And
sure.
so, yeah, again, as you said, there's more than 52. I had to
Right.
figure out what the 52 would be, and I wanted it to be a journey of every situation I could think of in life where an attribute, a characteristic of God would be helpful, or a promise of God would be helpful. And so it's not necessarily exhaustive, but yeah, it was a start.
It's a great start. So one of the names in here, in your book, as I was reading through it, it's on page, I've got it marked here. It's on page 68, and it's Shekhinah, which
Yeah.
is, or as it's often pronounced in English, Shekinah or Shekinah.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest with you, mate, I was really moved by this entry. And it's about halfway through the book, and this one
Yeah.
stood out because you tell a story in it. And you tell a lot of stories in both of the books, short and sweet. But you talk about being in Israel in the desert, and
Yeah.
really just sensing God's presence, which is what
Yeah.
that word Shekinah kind of is trying to capture.
Yeah.
So talk to us, just tell us a little bit, give people a little preview of this entry.
Yeah.
Talk to us about this name Shekinah,
Yeah.
and more about that moment in the desert.
Yeah, you pronounce it so much better than I do. All the transliterations in the book are with an Australian accent. So keep that in mind when you're reading through. Do it in an Australian accent. Shekhinah. Yeah, I remember
All
it.
good, mate.
I remember it so vividly. We were in the Negev desert. It was the first time my daughter had been with me to the Holy Land, and we'd just come from Gideon Springs. We'd spent the day swimming, and her and I were talking. We'd been to I think the next day we were hiking up Masada, right? So we knew we had to get to bed, but we were camping out in the middle of the Negev desert. And there was a bunch of creatives with me, guys who I've known and girls who I've known really, really well. There's probably 8 of us all up, and everybody had cameras, and we had drones, and we had like just a bunch of creatives in the middle of the desert. The sun's going down. It was like June, July. So it was just, it was stunning, not a cloud in the sky. And we went to the top of this mountain to watch the sunset over the Negev desert. And just being around creative people who are taking photos, but at the same time taking videos, sending drones up. There was a shepherd off in the distance, and one of the guys put his drone up in the air and was flying over the shepherd who was leading his sheep through the desert. And Psalm 23 was coming to life. Like,
wow,
the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me. And as the sun was still up, the shepherd was out in front. And then as the sun went below the horizon and it became darker, he came in amongst the sheep so that, your rod and staff comfort me. Now he's beside my shepherd. So we were watching the scriptures come alive right there and then.
yeah.
Everybody was like creating. Everybody was getting on the phone to call their loved ones and say, "Oh, I'm in the middle of and I'm there with my daughter. And she's experiencing this for the first time. And I'm seeing the scriptures come to life in my 16-year-old daughter's eyes. And I was just acutely aware that God was right there in that moment. He was talking to all of us. Not all of us audibly, not all of us
Yeah.
as a group. He was talking to us all as individuals. And that for me was such a profound moment. And even talking to my daughter, Geordie, at the time, and I said, Geordie, what are you feeling? And she's like, Dad, I feel like God is right here with us. Like God's
Wow.
in the desert having fun and laughing with us. And I feel like he's right beside me. And so for me, that was, to have your kids
Yeah.
say that, it's
Yeah, it's
even more
beautiful.
profound. But I
Can't
felt it
beat that.
myself, like even now, just remembering it, gosh, I'm getting emotional thinking about it
I
because
know, it's making me emotional. Yeah.
it was so tangible. And to see it in my daughter's eyes, to see her experience the presence of God.
Mm.
Yeah, that was the Shekinah. That was
That's
the glory.
Shekhinah. But you're
Yeah,
saying
that's Shekinah.
that's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
God's
Yeah.
glory right there.
I can
Right
feel
there.
that, man. I
And
can feel it. I think.
we felt safe. We felt peace. We felt it was a highlight moment for me in the
I
whole
love
event
it.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, you tell that one really touched me. Obviously, I have daughters too, and have been to these places, but that was really a beautiful story and example.
Yeah.
And you've got all kinds of great ones in here, but I just wanted to highlight that because I thought it was just a vivid illustration of the that Hebrew name for God. So really, kudos and great job. I'm excited about this and highly recommend it to everybody watching. So check it out on Amazon. It's super affordable too. So. Okay, Aussie Dave, I know we need to wrap this up, but before we go, I do want to ask you, for years, not just through the Hebrew and the Jewish stuff, man, you've just always had a big heart to help Christians get into the Bible, to understand it better.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested to know like what you're doing now with YouVersion.
Yeah.
You're the director for YouVersion for Australia.
Yeah.
So talk to us just a little bit about your work with YouVersion and how this platform is really just helping Christians worldwide.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a global thing. How it's helping them engage with the Bible.
Yeah, so it's such a great opportunity. It's such a great honor to be part of the team of YouVersion, which for a lot of people, they either know it as YouVersion or they know it as the Bible app. It's one of the first apps that came out in the Apple Store back in early 2000s. I think it was 2008 from memory. I'm pretty sure it was 2008.
Okay.
Yeah, it was one of the first apps, and it's had nearly 1 billion installs. In fact, we expect to pass 1 billion with a B, expecting to pass 1 billion this year. And that's the thing for me. I mean, this. That's a big number, but numbers matter because people count. Right? Numbers matter because people count. And we live in a world, especially here in Australia, where, the vast majority, in fact, it's something in the order of 93% of Australians aren't churched. So we live in a society where a lot of people are saying the Bible is irrelevant, that the scriptures are irrelevant today, and they're growing less and less irrelevant. And being able to be part of what YouVersion is doing helps remind me that we have 1 billion reasons to prove that it is still relevant, that there are people who are engaging with it on a regular basis. And so part of my role here is to help Australians engage with it more often and more regularly than they currently are. In the lifetime that the app has been available, there are 6.6 million installs in Australia. Australia is a population of 26 million people, so it's nowhere near as big as the US. So, I mean, that's a significant number of installs. And
that's a big chunk. Yeah.
That is a huge chunk. And so what I want to do is try to help people who have the app become more engaged with the scriptures on a regular basis, because that's when we know lives can be transformed. And I want to help connect them with a faith community, whatever that looks like in their context or wherever they're living in the world. Our mission at YouVersion is God's word everywhere, everyone, everywhere, every day. We want everyone to be engaging with it wherever they are every day, because we know that when people engage with the scriptures on a regular basis, data has shown this, that's when their lives start to change. And so one of the things we track is 4 or more times engaging with the Bible a week, because that is a tipping point for a whole lot of other data to come into play, that lives actually get transformed when they engage with scripture 4 times or more every day. And so a big part of what I'm doing is just trying to help more Australians in every part of Australia connect with God's word every day.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's such a great fit between what they're doing with what YouVersion doing, your role. It makes perfect sense. So
Yeah.
yeah, thanks for sharing that, and
Yeah.
that's good to hear. That's a very interesting that statistic of 4 times a week that resonates like that makes sense. If you're studying God's word and you're really in there at least 4 times a week, that's going to start to sink in. So,
well, again, you know this, but one of the things Rabbi Lubin taught me was that in the first century time of Jesus, studying scripture was the highest form of worship. It wasn't just about musicals. You know, in a lot of Western churches, we've made music the highest form of worship. But I think people will engage with the Bible more when they understand that worshiping Jesus is not just about singing and doing this. It's about studying and doing this. Just opening up the Bible. That can be the highest form of worship. And I have experienced that in my life. And I'm not downplaying musical worship at all. I'm a musician. You know, at North Point, I was on the worship team. I was a worship pastor in New Jersey. I get it. But understanding that one of the ways we can worship Jesus is by studying the Word. I mean, that was a game changer for me.
Yeah, it's a game changer. And, you know, back to the Jewish culture, you know, in Judaism, like at my synagogue, and really the kind of the Jewish tradition is that you have you have these daily synagogue services, and you have a Torah service on Monday, Thursday, and then of course on Shabbat. And so the question is, well, why Monday? Why Thursday? Of course, Shabbat makes sense. Well, the reason is if you're pulling the Torah scrolls out and reading it Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat, you'll never go 3 days without hearing God's word. So that's from a Jewish standpoint, built into the rhythm of the prayer services and cycles. And so that just sort of that underscores what you're talking about as well. So, okay, hey, mate, we're out of time. Before we close, real quick, I want to just make sure folks know what are the best ways, one, to get your book. What are the options for getting the new book? And then also, if folks want to keep up with your, Hebrew insights, what's the best way to do that?
Well, the easiest way to get any of the books that I've written is on Amazon. It's just the easiest way. I know it's not the most convenient for some people, but it is by far the easiest way. There are Christian bookstores that will sell it in the US. But Amazon is always the easiest way. And then, follow. I'm Aussie Dave on all social media, AUSSIE, Aussie Dave, on every platform. So follow me there, and I'd love to connect and hear stories about how this stuff is changing your faith journey as well. I try to make it a real goal of mine to respond to as many comments as I can.
Great
and
about
every
that.
direct message that I get, I try to respond to as quickly as I can. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer.
Sure.
But I just love hearing people's stories about how they're changing, and it's that online pastor in me always comes out, and I want to pray for people and pray with them and hear their stories of life change. So that's the best way to stay up to date.
Yep. And I encourage folks to do that. So Dave, hey man,
thanks, mate.
This was great. Before we sign off, I want to note that you were on a short list of people that I acknowledged in the back of my book on Paul that I wrote that came out last year or 2024. And I just want to read it. I don't know. I felt led to read what I wrote in here to you and about you in the back of my book, because I think it's important. And so I said, hey, Dave, you're an example of the solution to many of the problems I discussed in this book. Christians like you who are repairing what was broken are changing the game. And I said, I'm thankful for you, mate. Yeah. And I just want to encourage you with everything you're doing. Honestly, I think that what I wrote there, I feel good about it because I think it nails what you're doing, and you are changing the game in so many ways. You're not only helping Christians, I think what's really important is you're not only helping Christians to understand their faith better, you're also helping to repair the broken bridge between Jews and Christians, Judaism and Christianity. I mean, this relationship with Rabbi Lubin and in so many other ways. And I'm thankful that people are learning from you because you are making the world a better place and bringing the kingdom to earth. And so keep it up, mate. Appreciate you.
Thank you, buddy. I really appreciate it. It's great to see you as always.
All right. Yep. Thanks, Aussie Dave. We'll talk soon.
Mate.
Well, thanks for listening to today's show. Hey, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to subscribe. And if you're on YouTube, I would appreciate if you would click that like button and the notification bell so that you can be aware of when the next episode drops. And if you'd like to engage further, head over to ryanlambertforum.com. There you can sign up for the Game Changers email, which I send out twice a month, and it features short and sweet game-changing ideas and resources and tells you how we can interact further. So we'll be back soon with more game-changing ideas for a life well lived.